right, this is the inaugural podcast, The Professor and The Pastor.
What's up, John Byrne?
How are you doing?
Pastor John, I'm good, man.
Professor Mike. And so this is the inaugural one, so we're going to kind of get to know each other a little bit.
Cool.
And you and I, you've been my professor, my Jiu Jitsu professor, my Muay Thai crew for a few years here now.
Yes, sir.
And we just kind of talked about, hey, let's do a podcast together, and we've got to know each other a little bit, and we'll probably more. So, so I'm curious about you, about your background. I know you've been doing martial arts for a long time. Can you just give an idea of how you got into that, why you got into it, and maybe how that's benefited for you in life?
Yeah, man. Well, it's been my life for the last almost 30 years, and when I was a kid. This will date me a little bit, but I grew up watching Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris, and those guys are my heroes, and I always wanted to be like them. And so I always asked my parents, hey, can I do martial arts? Can I do karate? Can I do whatever? And my parents couldn't afford it. So I grew up in a poor household. And so finally, when I was 14, I was like, okay, I'm doing the moves on my little brother. I'm watching the moves and stuff like that. And we had like a karate store, down the street. And I'd like rent videos back in the day, like VHS, Beta, right? And I would literally rent VHS tapes.
What was that? VHS? What
yeah, exactly.
Beta?
Yeah. And so, it's like a Blockbuster, but, it was a martial arts store where they sold like weapons and gis.
Nice.
And they would rent VHS tapes. So I'd literally rent VHS tapes and practice in my backyard and, unfortunately my little brother. And so at 14 though, I decided, okay, well, like I need to go train. So I went and talked to my neighbors, started mowing lawns and doing chores for my neighbors and basically paid my way to do martial arts. And so the closest martial arts studio was within biking distance. There you go. I ended up there and did that for a couple of years. And then when I could drive, I went to a different martial arts studio that was, this one was like in a community center. So it was, not the highest quality. But, it was good. The instructor was good and stuff. And then, so then when I got a car, I was able to go down to a different studio and ended up being there for like 6 years. Got my black belt in Japanese karate, Japanese Jiu Jitsu. And then in 90,
I don't think I knew that. So you have because you're a black belt in Japanese Jiu Jitsu.
I am,
but then also Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Yes.
So you got two different kind of Jiu Jitsu black belts. I didn't know that. All right, very cool.
Yeah. And so then something crazy happened in 94, 95, and that was the UFC.
Oh yeah.
So so I saw this little 160-pound guy, Royce Gracie, in there like beating up 250-pound, giant monsters, and I was like, man, this is the future. Like it was me and all my friends at the time also trained, which was kind of cool. They've since fallen off, but they did at the time, and some of them were pretty good. Like brown belt, black belt, whatever. In karate, taekwondo, stuff like that. And so it was like 3 or 4 of my buddies were sitting around, and it must have been like a pay-per-view or something. I remember it was in my friend's basement. Anyway.
Like one of those first UFCs kind of thing?
The first.
No, like the UFC first. 1. That was here in Pepsi Center in Denver, right?
It was. So it was number 1. And I don't remember if it was their parents that rented it or we rented it or how it happened. But we watched the first UFC and all of us were just like, this is it. Like, this is the future. And there was no jiu-jitsu around me. I mean, back in that day, there was no jiu-jitsu in the area. And so I just kept training karate, and then my instructor would go down to Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And I don't remember exactly why. He was a police officer, so maybe for police stuff.
And did you lived in Washington then at the time?
Yeah, Seattle area, just south of Seattle.
Okay.
So I was in the Seattle, Washington, Northwest area.
Very cool.
So he would go down, my instructor would go down to Portland, and I think it was for his police academy stuff. I'm not sure, but he was a police officer. So he would go down there, and then he'd bring back, he would train with the Jiu Jitsu and Muay Thai guy down there. So he'd bring, and a colleague guy, Filipino martial arts. And so he would bring that back, and then we would train it because I was one of his main training partners. Then he would leave and then come back. So I kind of learned like a little bit of Jiu Jitsu, but I mean, you can imagine someone that does 2 jiu-jitsu classes trying to teach someone else. So it's pretty rudimentary. Right. Probably, I'd probably laugh at it now. It's probably
terrible arm bars and
it's probably pretty horrible. But for me, it was cool, right? And I was learning actual boxing now and actual kickboxing, versus karate, and I was learning some fundamentals of jiu-jitsu. So that went on for a little bit, and then I decided that, I'm just going to go do some other stuff. So I stopped going to that school and kind of, I was teaching a lot and stuff and training a lot, but I decided, okay, well, I'm going to go do something else. And so I kind of quit martial arts for a little bit, maybe like 6 months at the most. And so I saw this guy. I was walking in the mall one day, and I saw this shirt, and it said like Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, Muay Thai, mixed martial arts. And I went up, I was like, hey man, I was like, do you train? And he's like, yeah, I train. I go, where's your school at? He goes, about 2 blocks that way. And for those of you guys aren't watching, I'm just pointing. And so literally it's just 2 blocks away from the mall. And so went down there literally like a day later, watched him train for about 10 minutes. And I was like, hey, where do I sign up?
Nice.
And that was my instructor, Chris Clark. He's still my instructor. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I haven't even like gone over prices. I haven't even told you. I go, I don't care.
I'll figure it out.
Just sign me up. Because I knew it. You know what I mean? I was already a black belt in 2 martial arts. And, I was fairly good, at those martial arts.
Yeah.
State champion, regional champion, whatever. And then I saw this stuff and I was like, oh man, like this is what I need to be doing. Like this is, and again, back then it was like, I was at the horse and carriage. Yeah. And someone just came out with a Model T. You know what I'm saying? This thing, it was like, I just knew. I knew where the future was going. And this was in 98. So this was 98. And so there you go, signed up. And ever since then, I've been doing Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and everything else.
That's so cool. And you've trained with some guys who are kind of pioneers as far as the UFC and things. I mean, you talk about watching UFC 1, but some of the guys you've trained with are guys that kind of that next generation, maybe after that first generation. Chris Paulson and Erik Paulson. Erik Paulson. And I know you trained with Sean Shirk a little bit.
Yep, Eric's student. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some of that. So how was that? How did that formulate you as far as an instructor today and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, it was crazy. Those guys, it's funny because, obviously Brazil was one of the genesis of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well as mixed martial arts. And, this was funny because a lot of people, they don't understand the roots of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Right.
And, when Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu became Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right, when Count Como brought it over from Japan to Brazil and met the Gracie family, which was well-off family, and then started training their sons. And those guys developed, what later became Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Yeah. One of the first things they did was have basically MMA fights, right? So they have the Gracie Challenge.
Right.
And, they would, challenge people. And
bring these karate guys in or whatever.
Bring these karate guys in or these Americans in and beat them up, whatever. And,
we love karate guys, by the way.
Oh, yeah, they're great. I've got a black belt karate, so I can luckily. And so... So I mean, there was striking, punching, elbowing, kneeing, there was all that stuff. A lot of it was open hand, and kind of my understanding, the philosophy there was, so they didn't break their knuckles because it was there was no gloves. I don't know if that's exactly true, but they would punch too, also closed fists. You see a lot of them. They would also punch closed fists and elbow and knee and stuff. So even though their striking isn't as developed as like, Muay Thai or boxing, they still had it, right? And then you've got kind of the other side of it, which was the Japanese also developed it. So they called it Shuto. And so they had their own system of, martial arts where they actually were kind of at the same time developing their side of things, right? And that was much more heavy in the leg locks, probably a little bit better in the striking, but not as good in the what we call Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu aspects of it, the positional stuff and the submissions and stuff like that. So anyway, Erik, so he was one of the first light heavyweight Shudo champions. And so he actually, to my knowledge, was pre-UFC.
Okay. Yeah. And I know you mentioned him, we're talking about leg locks, I don't know, a month ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that. And you just talked about how old stuff becomes new again. And so I was like going on YouTube and watching Erik Paulson and kind of just,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is a lot of the stuff that is so huge with, Danaher and, Death Squad and all that kind of stuff. And, Gordon Ryan and a lot of that stuff was kind of Erik Paulson who you trained with.
100%. And again, he got it from the Japanese because, and he also trained, with some other folks, but primarily, he did some Sambo stuff, so some, Russian stuff, and then Shuto, which is Japanese, and both those systems, Sambo and Shuto, have a lot of leg attacks. And but it's funny, and people don't believe me, but you can literally go on YouTube and there's no denying it's the 80s. You can tell the 80s,
right? The way they dress, the quality of the video. All of it.
Yeah, the long ponytail, and I love you, Erik. I do. The long ponytail and the neon spandex, like right away, like we're in the 80s. And but you'll see the material is the material is very, very similar to what the new school jiu-jitsu guys are doing. And I love Danny here. I think Danny here's a phenomenal genius instructor. Right. I think the way that he breaks it down, he's one of the best as far as being able to explain to people, the system of leg locking and the ashigarami and how to control the hips and inside line control and stuff. But Erik was definitely one of the first Americans that had the material.
I watched one of those mixed martial arts fights where he had the ponytail. I guess he was going to do a movie or something, and then he cut it like right after or something because I think because they would pull. I think they pulled on it. We're pulling his hair and stuff. Yeah, it was legal. So they were pulling his hair in that fight or whatever.
Yeah, they grabbed the hair.
But anyways, you haven't only done martial arts, so you've been in the business world a little bit and stuff, and of course now you own a gym and are running that, and so. To kind of maybe talk a little bit about that, and why did you move from being in the business world, corporate USA, into martial arts?
Sure, yeah.
As far as a living is concerned.
How much time you got? No, so I'll try to make it short. So I worked for Boeing. I was one of the youngest managers, actually, the youngest manager in my division of Boeing, and I was going to school at the time, training martial arts a lot, and that's when I found Chris. I was with Boeing, Chris Clark. Started doing Muay Thai and Jiu Jitsu. So anyway, I got a job offer for Bank of America. Great job. Getting paid way too much for probably, what I should have been, office secretary of the whole dealio. And I'm a young kid. I'm like 20 years old. And so I decided to turn down the job, go back to school, put a nose ring in, turn into a hippie, got a hemp necklace.
Nice. And I'm trying to visualize this right now.
That's a long time ago. And so 20 years ago. And so went back to school and was going to become a professor, was going to become, I was
like an academic professor, not a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu professor.
No. And so I was doing that. I was published. I was a scientist. I was doing biopsychology and kinesiology, biomechanics. And I was down the path, really deep down the path of doing that. And at the same time, though, I was teaching. So I started like the first Muay Thai club at my college, and then the first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu club, and then I just kind of took over the school with all these. I actually got my martial arts classes. Actually, now are worth credit at the university, so you can take martial arts. Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
So I had like Muay Thai. You could take Muay Thai for credit.
Nice.
At Western Washington University, and so I did all this stuff, and I was teaching. And at one point, I kind of realized like one has to give.
Yeah,
like I can't pursue academia full-time and martial arts full-time, which I was doing. It was crazy. Right. And so I'm like, man, like I'm going to quit school and just open a school. And people are like, what? Like you're a shoe-in. You know what I mean? You're top 3% of your university. All the professors love you. They've all written you recommendations and this and that and everything. And, I just decided like, man, this is my passion. I want to do it. And the reason I didn't, to kind of go back to your question, want to do that to begin with was I didn't want to confuse like my love and my passion, because it is my first love. I even told my wife that, like, sorry, I've got a first love. But I didn't want to confuse my love and my passion with how to make money. And I thought those would always butt heads, right? Sure. Yeah. And so I just decided, though, like, hey, I'm going to go for it. If it doesn't work, I can always go back to academia. Right. I can always go back to something else. But I wanted to give it a try and see if I could marry the two, right, and not have a conflict there. And so I moved down to California because I heard California is where all the fitness people were and all the money was. and moved down to California, and the rest is history.
Yeah. And so did you have your own school in California?
I didn't. No, I ran a couple other schools. Okay. Yeah, so I was a general manager of one, and then I was a vice president for Quentin Rampage Jackson for his academy. It was called the Rampage Fitness Academy. Okay. So if you remember that guy.
I remember you've mentioned you've trained with him or something along the way.
Yeah, I trained him for Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, like when he fought John Jones. Okay. And I also ran his company. I was the vice president of his company. So I ran everything, head, top to bottom, as far as his gym, not his personal finance or any, none of the media stuff or
that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. But just he had an academy, a gym called the Rampage Fitness Academy. So ran that. And then
you came out here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you, kind of purchased or whatever. I don't know what that whole one thing went down, but it was the training camp. Now it's peak. And yeah, very cool. And that's when I ran into you.
Yeah.
And showed up at the training. Actually, my son showed up at the training camp, and then me later. So, so that's cool. Well, so that's Professor Mike.
That's me in a nutshell. That's me in a nutshell.
That's awesome, and it's a cool story. So yeah. So
right on.
Yeah,
right on, Pastor John. How about you, my friend?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of funny, it's. Not a lot of people think pastor and then training martial arts, which I really enjoy. And I'm an older guy. Like I didn't start martial arts till later. My first love was ministry. I loved being a pastor. I was kind of the kid that my grandma called me her preacher boy, and apparently I would like practice preaching when I was little or something like that. It's kind of weird. My grandpa was a pastor, and my uncle's a pastor, and so it's in the family.
Grew up in a religious family.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Although not necessarily a great, healthy family environment. But my grandpa and my uncle were pastors, and I spent a lot of time with my grandma and my grandpa they had a farm in Wisconsin. And I loved going out there. I love the outdoors, love that whole thing. But they had he pastored this little church. He was a real estate agent, and then he pastored this little tiny church, this little tiny town. Literally, it was like one of those things. It's so stereotypical. It's funny. You walk into this church, and there's a bunch of gray heads in the church, and my grandma's up there playing organ. My grandpa would get up and teach Sunday school class, and then he'd preach, and I didn't even know which was which. It was like, when's he teaching and when's he preaching? Because it all felt the same to me. Yeah. And so I just grew up around that, and my mom was a very strong Christian, but she made some bad decisions with the guys she married. And my biological dad left when I was 2. She married another guy who was a jerk, just putting it nicely. Yeah. And a lot of abuse in the household. Not so much of me, but of her more than me. Although there was some of me, but and so divorced him, and I'm kind of like just a mess through the whole thing. I was a teenager when she divorced him, and so I'm kind of figuring out what is it? This really sucks. Like life kind of sucked, So I even went back, a number of years ago. I went back to high school reunion and started talking to friends, and like they were talking about all the stuff that happened in high school. I'm like, man, I don't even remember high school. Like it was like this period of my life that I hated, and I didn't want to be at home, and so I would do whatever sport I could, and I'd have a job, and I'd do school, and so I would leave for work in the morning, for school in the morning. And then after school, I'd do whatever sport, football or whatever. And, and if it wasn't football, it was track or baseball or lifting weights or whatever. And then I'd go work. I worked at McDonald's, Yes. And learned to say please and thank you. They were big on that. And so that's where I learned to say please and thank you. Oh, and
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it was a big deal for them. You know how like Chick-fil-A is now? It's like, oh, it's a pleasure to serve you. Like McDonald's was kind of that in the late 80s.
Oh, wow.
And whatever. They were real big on that stuff. So so then I'd come home at like 9, 10 o'clock at night, go to bed, and just get up and do it again. Yeah. Anything I could do to not be home.
Yes.
That was kind of my thing. But I was very involved in church and youth group and all that kind of stuff. That was kind of my peace in the storm, so to speak. It was.
Well, it could have gone another way, so it's probably good you found them.
Well, no, that's so true. And I even watched like some other people that around me who had rough backgrounds, and there's kind of 2 ways you can go, right? Like there's I'm gonna go be a gangbanger or what. Not. I was kind of more rural, but whatever. I'm going to go and screw up my life. What's that?
Be a hooligan.
Yeah, hooligan. Yeah. I'm going to go get in trouble. I'm going to go, drink, get drunk, go do drugs, whatever, all that kind of stuff. But I didn't. And yet that's kind of background I sort of have, at least in that way. So I decided at the age of 13 I wanted to be pastor.
Wow, crazy.
And so I was going to be youth pastor. And I kind of stuck with it, obviously. And got through high school, survived it, went to college. I was leading a youth group at 17 when there were kids in the youth group that were older than I was, and I was like their youth pastor or whatever, and lead them on trips and stuff. But that was just kind of the environment that I found myself in. Met my wife, got married, moved out here to Colorado, lived out here in 93, 95, and just pounded nails and stuff, and then went back to school and kind of finished up school. And I've been a pastor for 20 plus years.
Wow.
And I love it. I love what I do. I love helping people. I love, I love helping people figure out how to work through life and follow Jesus and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my passion. But I didn't wrestle in high school. I didn't have any martial arts background. I didn't do any of that stuff. And so it was kind of crazy, but I wanted my son to be able to have the confidence and to defend himself and still working on that. He's 13 years old, but I didn't have that. And I grew up in this environment where there were times where I was like, man, if I could defend my mom or whatever from my stepdad, I would have done it. But I couldn't.
Gotcha.
And so that was kind of, I think that really formulated what later came to be, I want my son in martial arts. So he did karate. And then we moved to Lakewood and we signed him up at the training camp. Cause I kind of knew, like, I love karate, but at least the school he was at, good school if you want to go and, I don't know, like go to these tournaments where they don't touch each other, great. It's basically gymnastics with a weapon or something or fighting movements. But it was great for that. But I just knew, dude, in real life, that ain't going to cut it.
Yeah, you wanted the real deal.
I wanted the real deal.
Yeah.
And so when we moved to Lakewood, I found the training camp.
Cool.
And we walked in and I signed him up, and it was a really cool environment. It wasn't a bunch of meatheads just beating on each other. It was a really good environment for kids. And signed him up, and I was fat. I was like 250 pounds.
Yeah.
And
which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and I was finishing up my master's degree. And so I got done with my master's degree, and dude, I'm in bad shape. And so I got to do something. And so I'm like, well, Joe's doing martial arts. I'm going to go do it too. And so I came in and signed up, and so that's been really good. And, lost a bunch of weight, but have really enjoyed the environment and stuff like that. And so that's kind of my short story, but it's just kind of crazy because you don't think of pastor and martial arts. And I still am almost cautious about that at times, and of course I got like, little black eye going on right now.
That was
It was not you. There's somebody else at the gym though.
Yeah.
But then you get up on Sunday and you got to preach and you got a black eye, and so so sometimes I'm a little careful about that kind of stuff. So I'll probably be putting some makeup on this Sunday morning.
Absolutely. I won't tell anyone. Don't worry.
But it's all good. But I've always wanted to kind of be able to do that and to do martial arts. But people react funny because pastors are supposed to be, I don't know what we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be peaceful. We're supposed to, whatever, and that kind of thing. And that's all good. But I'm a really competitive guy. I've actually mellowed a lot out over the years a lot. But so I've always had competition in my life. It used to be like softball or that kind of stuff. And so now it's kind of transformed. I can't throw a ball anymore because my shoulder's all jacked up and that kind of stuff. But I can do martial arts where they really crank on your shoulder.
Yeah. You can hide it though. You can hide it.
You can hide it, yeah.
Especially the better you get at Jiu Jitsu, you can kind of you can fake a lot of stuff people don't realize.
You can, which has been weird for me because I've had a couple injuries on my right side and
work around it.
I work around it. I figure out how to hide it or, whatever.
Yeah.
So it's been kind of fun. But it's been really great because it's kind of fed that competitive spirit that I have. I compete with old guys and it's also, and coaching, I've always been a coach. I've coached basketball, volleyball, and, baseball and all kinds of stuff, either for my kid or for some small schools and stuff like that along the way. And so I also get to do that a little bit and kind of coach people at the gym and stuff like that. And so that's kind of my journey through, I still love to be a pastor, so I get to do that. And, but I also get to do some martial arts. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
A Renaissance man.
I guess, right.
I think there were a lot more, if you look back at the, history and even, through the Bible, even though I'm definitely not an expert in the Bible, but there were a lot of warrior scholars and warrior healers throughout history.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, like you said now, I'm not supposed to be, which is kind of funny when you think about that, right? You think about, well, I'm not supposed to be this warrior and this healer, right? Or this warrior and this advisor. But I think you can. I think for me, that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
Almost, you know what I'm saying? Because you kind of understand that side of it.
Yeah.
Whether you call it the dark side of it or the aggressive side of it, which I don't think is bad, but I would say, especially in today's society, a lot of other people would, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, you hurt people. Well, no, I don't hurt people. Like I train hard and I'm learning to deal with not having to hurt someone.
Yeah.
Right. Or if I do need to save someone or protect someone, I could do that, and I think that gives you a good, viewpoint of that side, I think, when you're trying to talk someone through it. But I also think that too, it lets you kind of deal with some of your own inner turmoils,
right,
as well. You deal with on the mat versus wherever else.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's interesting because we even, and I don't, probably won't get into this too much very often, but I did a sermon this last Sunday.
Oh, cool.
We're talking about Abram, and he goes and his nephew Lot gets kidnapped, basically gets taken, his family, and these 4 kings come and take over this, his land or whatever, and kidnap him. And Abram becomes the mighty warrior. He goes and him and his 318, Navy SEAL, whatever trained guys go and take on these 4 kings and rescue him. And you think about a lot of these characters in the Bible, and I think that kind of encourages me. Abram, David, and Goliath. Everybody knows David and Goliath, even though they don't know the Bible, but. And a lot of these guys, and there were times, and even if you, like you said, what I love about you said is you go back in history, and there was even in the early days of the United States pre the Revolutionary War,
Abraham Lincoln,
Abraham Lincoln, and a lot of those guys were Christians or some religious, and even they had a black robe. I don't know if you noticed, they had a black robe regiment, which is a bunch of pastors and stuff.
Crazy!
Who fought and stuff.
Navy SEAL pastors.
Navy SEAL pastors.
I love
it. So I am encouraged by that, and we have. I think you're right. We have. There's that whole toxic masculinity thing. Maybe we'll do something. Maybe we'll do a podcast. We'll talk about that sometime.
Let's get dirty.
so sometime down the road, that would be a good topic.